This is the story of a man who never held public office. And yet, when the nation faced collapse, presidents turned to him. He didn't win elections. He didn't run campaigns. But he financed the economy, stabilized Wall Street, and built the foundations of modern American capitalism. His name was John Pierpont Morgan. Born into wealth, trained across Europe, and destined for finance, he would become the most powerful banker in American history. J.P. Morgan was born on April 17, 1837, in Hartford, Connecticut. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was already a well-connected banker. The young Morgan grew up surrounded by discussions of business, trade, and international finance. He was groomed from childhood to carry the family legacy, first at Hartford Public School, then Boston English High School. But it was his time in Europe that shaped him most. In 1854, he enrolled at the University of Göttingen in Germany, one of Europe's most prestigious institutions. There he studied mathematics, German, and French, skills that would later serve him well in international banking. Unlike many of his American peers, Morgan was being prepared for a global stage, a man born in America, but built in Europe. By the late 1850s, J. Pierpont Morgan was no longer just the son of a banker. He was on the verge of becoming one of the most powerful forces in American finance. In 1857, Pierpont joined Duncan, Sherman and Company, the American agent of his father's London firm George Peabody & Co. It wasn't glamorous work. He began as an unpaid apprentice, handling paperwork, copying letters, filing documents. But to Morgan, it was a classroom, a place to observe, to listen, to learn the rhythm of the markets. He studied the language of debt, the structure of capital, and the unpredictable winds of international trade. It was during his early days that a global panic struck, the Panic of 1857. Railroads collapsed, banks shuttered, investors fled, the country's financial foundation trembled, and Morgan was there to witness it all. Morgan's father, Junius Spencer Morgan, brought discipline and transatlantic structure to his career. From London, he wrote letters, offered guidance, and laid the groundwork for what would become a financial dynasty. Morgan, his father wrote, "Conduct your business with honor. That is the only capital which endures." In 1861, Morgan formed a short-lived partnership with Charles H. Dabney, creating the firm J. Pierpont Morgan & Company. Though small in scale, the firm dealt in foreign exchange, trade financing, and government bonds. Morgan began to understand how capital could be moved across oceans. Fast, quiet, powerful. When the Civil War broke out, finance became a battlefield. Morgan's firm helped finance the Union's war effort, buying and reselling rifles, investing in railroads, funding logistics. He understood a vital truth. In war, finance is as crucial as armies. In 1861, Morgan financed a controversial deal involving surplus rifles, the Hall carbine affair. Rifles were bought cheaply from the army and resold to them at a premium. Though legal, the deal sparked moral outrage and public debate. To Morgan, the deal wasn't about weapons. It was about leverage, about understanding what people need when they're desperate. He learned that trust was a currency more volatile than gold. From that point, Morgan became obsessed with reputation, reliability, and strength. In 1864, Morgan joined his father's firm officially, rebranded as Dabney, Morgan & Company. The firm rose quickly in New York's financial circles. Pierpont became the face of American finance to the world. Morgan was mastering capital, not just accumulating it, but controlling its movement. He began studying railroads, telegraphs, coal mines, anything that made America run. He didn't follow the money, he led it. Morgan's early years weren't about fortune, they were about formation, discipline, perception, patience. He wasn't just becoming a banker, he was becoming the banker. By the 1870s, America was expanding, but it was also unraveling. The Civil War had ended, but economic instability was rising, and the railroads, once symbols of progress, were becoming symbols of chaos. By 1873, a financial panic gripped the United States. Railroad companies had borrowed heavily, expanded rapidly, and in many cases, recklessly. Dozens of railroads defaulted on their debts. Workers went unpaid, Investors were wiped out. Railroad bankruptcies became national headlines. America's industrial arteries were failing, and something had to be done. And that's where J. Pierpont Morgan saw not just a crisis, but a formula. Morgan didn't just bail out railroads, he reorganized them. He stepped in, examined their books, fired corrupt managers, refinanced debt, and consolidated control. Efficiency, stability, control. That was Morgan's recipe, said one railroad executive. Morgan believed that chaos was bad for capitalism, so he imposed structure. He brought rival companies together. He standardized rates. He installed trusted directors, his directors, on every board he touched. In time, Morgan controlled over 60,000 miles of American railroad, nearly 1/6 of the entire national system. It was the largest private infrastructure control in the world. The public called it Morganization. To Morgan, it was economic surgery. If a company was bleeding, he'd cut deep, remove the rot, and stitch it back together. Leaner, stronger, profitable. A man always has two reasons for what he does. A good one, and the real one. J.P. Morgan. By the 1880s, Morgan had consolidated control of major railroads like the New York Central, the Erie Railroad, Northern Pacific, and the Chesapeake and Ohio. And yet, he kept a low profile. He rarely gave interviews. He avoided speeches. But behind closed doors, he ran industries. He would call railroad presidents to his office at 23 Wall Street. They called it the House of Morgan. Once inside, there was no negotiation. Morgan would puff a cigar, glance at the numbers, and make his decision. "Gentlemen, this is the way it will be," he'd say. And it would be so. This wasn't democracy. It was dollar diplomacy. Morgan wasn't elected, but elected officials came to him. During the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, Morgan remained quiet, but calculated. While others feared revolution, he began planning consolidation. He realized something. Fragmentation created weakness, and unity, under his command, could create wealth. "I don't want a lawyer to tell me what I cannot do. I hire him to tell me how to do what I want to do." J.P. Morgan. With every merger, Morgan grew stronger. With every reorganization, Wall Street feared him more, but relied on him more too. The markets began to trust in Morgan's stability, from chaos to control. By 1890, no major railroad deal happened without his blessing. His network of bankers, lawyers, and railroad executives formed what historians now call the Morgan Syndicate, a quiet empire, built on deals and discipline. But not everyone admired him. Populists called him a monopolist, a robber baron, a kingpin behind capitalism's curtain. Newspapers questioned, should one man hold such power? But Morgan didn't answer critics. He answered crises. Because in 1893, the country faced its greatest crisis yet. By the early 1890s, America was growing fast. Too fast. Railroads were overbuilt, banks were overleveraged, Wall Street was restless. Then, the collapse came. In 1893, the U.S. faced a financial panic. Banks failed. Companies shut down. The stock market crashed. And the gold reserve? It was running out. The country was out of money and out of time. President Grover Cleveland needed help, but not from Congress, not from a general. He turned to one man, J. Pierpont Morgan. Morgan stepped in. He offered the government a deal, 3.5 million ounces of gold, in exchange for government bonds. It was fast, it was bold, and it worked. The panic slowed, confidence returned. The US dollar was saved. Morgan didn't run for office. He didn't make speeches. He didn't ask for power, but he held it. His office at 23 Wall Street became America's unofficial central bank. Some called him a hero. Others called him a tyrant. But in 1893, when the country was collapsing, J.P. Morgan held it together. By the dawn of the 20th century, J. Pierpont Morgan was no longer just a financier. He was an empire builder. In the past, he had reorganized banks, stabilized railroads, and quieted panics. But now, He had set his eyes on something bigger, much bigger: steel. Steel was the backbone of America's growth: bridges, buildings, railroads, ships. And one man stood atop the steel world: Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie Steel was the most powerful steel company in the world. Its mills stretched across Pennsylvania. Its profits soared. But Morgan didn't want to compete with Carnegie. He wanted to absorb him. In 1900, Morgan approached Carnegie with an offer. Carnegie, tired of battles, dictated a number on a slip of paper. Morgan looked at it, nodded, and shook his hand. The price? $480 million. Today, that's over $17 billion. In one single deal, Morgan bought out Carnegie and dozens of smaller rivals. He merged them into a new company, United States Steel Corporation, U.S. Steel. With a capitalization of $1.4 billion, U.S. Steel became the first billion-dollar corporation in history. It controlled 2/3 of America's steel production. It employed over 170,000 workers. And it was a symbol of corporate power, of industrial dominance. But U.S. Steel was more than a business. It was a message that capitalism had changed. No longer about small shops and local trade. Now, it was about consolidation, scale, monopoly. Morgan didn't just build companies. He built ecosystems. With U.S. Steel, he created a self-sufficient industrial empire, from the mines to the mills to the rails that carried the steel. It was control from top to bottom. Not everyone was impressed. Progressives saw Morgan's moves as dangerous. Too much power in the hands of one man. They questioned, how could one unelected banker reshape an entire industry? Was this capitalism, or a quiet corporate monarchy? But Morgan, he never answered critics. He built outcomes. U.S. Steel would go on to shape America's skylines, its wars, its economy. From the Empire State Building to the Golden Gate Bridge, Morgan Steel was everywhere. And while Morgan never ran for office, his boardrooms held more power than most governments. With U.S. Steel, Morgan didn't just make history, he forged it. J.P. Morgan wasn't just a banker, he was a builder of railroads, of steel, of trust. And in the darkest hours, when the markets shook and leaders stood still, he acted. But time moves on. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created, a system built to prevent another panic like 1907. The very job Morgan had done, alone. On March 31st, 1913, J.P. Morgan died in Rome. When news reached the U.S., the stock market paused in silence. Even Wall Street stood still. A quiet farewell to the man who once was Wall Street. Today, his name remains etched in books, in banks, in buildings. But more than that, his legacy lives in the very fabric of America's economy. Not just for the money he moved, but for the system he helped shape. Love him or hate him, J.P. Morgan proved that in times of uncertainty, power often lies not in titles, but in action, and that sometimes one man really can steady a nation.